with another video. Today I am talking about the interview questions that I practiced and studied and able to be prepared for the JET program. I did get a request on my last video. I will put that one up here if you guys could watch that on my interview tips. I got one request saying that they wanted to know what I practiced on, and I figured if I have one person, maybe a bunch of people will want to know once this video gets hyped. So I'm doing it now. I'm doing this for you guys now. You're welcome. So let's get into it. So I have about 5 different categories that I color coded on these like flashcards. I think I got a set of 50, and I'm gonna go through each of them. I hope this video won't be too long. If it is, I do apologize. If it's too long, I'll probably put something down below, like a Google Doc or something, so that you guys can like see the questions. Like I said, I did split these up into 5 different colored sections. The first section is blue. These are questions that are generally asked in the interview or in an interview, questions that I thought they would ask about the JET program, just like your typical interview style questions. The first one is the most dreaded and most feared. Tell me about yourself. And then also, I feel like it's necessary to have a 2-minute elevator pitch speech, something that like tells them something like a little more in depth about you. You guys can look up videos about how to do an elevator pitch. There's tons of videos online. Another question, the next question was, why do you want to become an ALT? Why do you want to become an assistant learning teacher? How will you handle difficult times in Japan? And I have like more questions like this on the other categories, but I figured this would be like a surface level. What I tend to do is write similar questions and practice an answer that's available for every type of question that you could get. So you could be asked this question 6 different ways, have generally the same answer. The next question is, how do you deal with stress? Is there anything that can bring you down while in Japan, and how would you overcome that? So this is kind of gauging like the basis of their program. I know that a lot of people go there and they get overwhelmed and then they leave, and it's called like flight. It's like a real thing. Another question is, what are your best and worst qualities? How will you overcome culture shock? Why did you choose JET over other companies like Interact or Aon or any other teaching eikaiwas? Talk about a challenge that you had to overcome, whether it was at work or school. Talk about a challenge that you had to overcome. What are some of your hobbies? And then of course, why do you want to go to Japan? Now for this question, I mean, you guys, discretion is advised. Please don't say like, yeah, I want to go to Japan because anime. Duh. Like, everybody that applies for this program likes anime at some point. So make it a little more deep than that. What if you don't get your preferences? What would you do? How would you feel? How will you deal with isolation? And then lastly, how did you hear about the JET program? How did you find out about us? So those are the blue questions. They're just general JET program related questions that I figured I'd write down. I have answers on them, but you don't have to have answers on your flashcards. You can just kind of like memorize them. I just wanted to make sure that I was saying similar stuff each time. The next section is the orange section, which is pretty much like teaching stuff. And this one's significantly smaller. There's only 5 questions because they don't require teaching experience. They may ask some general questions, but they're not going to like drill you with, oh, you should know how to teach. So the first question I have is, how would you handle being left alone by your Japanese teacher? For example, if you're teaching and they decide, hey, I'm leaving the lesson to you, how would you handle that? How will you communicate/teach low-level English speaking students? What games might you play to help your class learn? Can you show us? If you had to do a mock lesson on America, what are three things that you would talk about during your lesson? And then of course I have the mock lesson subject on blah blah blah, and I literally put a blank there just in case I couldn't decide what lesson I would try to teach. And you could put stuff there like colors, shapes, fruits, anything that you could turn into an English lesson, you could put there and just practice something quick. I recommend having like 2 examples. For me, I chose colors and I chose fruit. That way, if I wanted to use them both together, I could do that. So that was the orange section. The next section is the red section, which is kind of like questions that are, and I made them red on purpose because they're kind of like danger questions that I feel they may ask depending on where you're from. I'm from America, so of course when I was applying to the JET program, you had a lot of tension going on in America, and I feel like because I am black, there's like certain questions that might be a little more triggering for me to answer. So I just have like general questions like that, basically to gauge my mental state. So these questions are gauging like your mental ability, like how do you handle like social things around you. The red section is more questions that are about like your experiences from your country, teaching from the perspective of your country. So, and they're like mentally gauging just to see like where you are as far as like your country and Japan. The first question is, what would you say to a foreigner who wanted to come to America? This one was hard for me because, you know, America's got its issues. What would I tell a Japanese person about America? Teach about a holiday in your country. Of course, this is specific to your country. How would you promote Japan to others in your country? What are 3 things from your home country that you would bring to Japan to showcase your home? Would you be okay with joining after-school activities? The next question for the red section is, if a student asks you something that is uncomfortable for you, how would you answer that, or how would you handle that? So like for us African American people, if a student comes up and asks like, oh, why don't you shower because you're so dark? It's best to come up with examples of like how to explain that to a child, especially if you have little kids. Another question that I put in this red section is, how would you work with your Japanese colleagues? On top of that, how would you react if your coworkers did not like you? Another question that I have that is in this red section is, how would you get involved outside of teaching in your community? Then also, I think it's important for us to know that like no country is perfect. Every country has their issues. So one of the questions that I have for this section that you should probably think about answering is, how will you respond to prejudice and negativity about you and your country in Japan? Because we're not going to pretend that everybody likes America. We're also not going to pretend that everybody likes black people or white people or other non-Japanese Asian people. You might move to a town where there's just prejudice against you because of who you are. So I think it's necessary to have like an idea of what to answer if you get asked this question. Along with that, you could also answer, how will you represent America or insert your country here while you are in Japan? And then what could you give back to Japan after you've left? The last question for this section is, Do you know of any current events in Japan that connect to your country? Or do you know of any current events in Japan that they would like bring up right now? The next section primarily has to do with the pandemic. Unfortunately, that's where we live in. This is how we are living our life right now. And a really big talking point is social distancing and keeping yourself and others safe. So I have a green section, which is about questions that are related to COVID-19 and, you know, all of that. They're pretty small because I don't assume that they would ask a ton of questions. I didn't get asked any questions about this, but just in case, have some available. The first question is, how do you plan to cope with social distance teaching while kids are in school since they're still coming to school? How will you continue to exchange cultures in Japan during an isolation period? I know that one of the biggest talking points of the JET program is to exchange cultures with each other, but how do you do that if you can't go to events, if the areas are shut down because of COVID? If you have a pre-existing condition, how will you feel being in a country alone? Will you be able to handle being placed in a countryside or an isolated Inaka area while in a pandemic? And the reason why I think this is important is because you're already having to deal with the possibility of getting a countryside placement, but then on top of that, you're even more isolated because of COVID. You can't go do social gatherings with Japanese locals because, you know, unfortunately, from what I understand, the rhetoric in Japan is that the foreigners have brought COVID. So like, how do you deal with something like that? Have these questions ready just in case they ask you. Do you have a plan or extra steps that you would take to be safe while in Japan during this time? So those are some of the COVID related questions. I'm sure that like there's others out there that you could think of, but at the time when I was practicing, there was not a vaccine available for people my age. There was also not a vaccine booster shot, so maybe you might want to add some questions in there about that, like what's the availability for foreigners, you know, just figure that type of stuff out. And then we're on to our last section. So the last section is the most important section because it has to do with your SOP. I went through my SOP and I read out my SOP, like covered like paragraph to paragraph, and I just gathered questions that I put in purple for what they may ask me about my SOP. So the first question, and these are tailored to your SOP, so please do not take mine as your examples. You want to do this section of the questions based on what you've put in your statement of purpose. How can you relate your job working for a pharmaceutical company to teaching? How will you connect wanting to do HR to Japanese exchange? Which international businesses will help you reach this goal? How do you plan on benefiting professionally from living in Japan? And then I picked questions like, explain why you picked your preferences. Once again, if you did not see my previous video on interview tips, I will link it above so that you guys can understand like why I put that in there, and you should probably do some research on your preferences just in case they ask you about them. What will your post-JET career look like, and how will it be relevant to your stay in Japan? And like I said, most of these questions are kind of like regurgitated, but like have an answer that's ready so that you can spit it out whenever it's asked. Can you elaborate on your experience with your Japanese roommates while you were in university or while you were in college? Can you give us an example of when you will use creativity and communication while teaching the students? Can you elaborate on your experience in the hotel industry in connection to international cultural exchange? Does having asthma concern you with teaching during a pandemic? Why or why not? I have asthma, by the way. So how will you connect your degree into teaching English? How will you connect the two? So the purple section literally is just tailored to what you put in your SOP. If you went to school for animation or anything super cool, put that stuff in these questions and practice them with your friends. That is the end of my questions. I think there are about 50 of them or so. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up. If you have any additional questions that you would think are helpful to people watching this video, put them down below, because I'm guaranteeing you I did not cover all of it. So hopefully you guys use these questions. They are good examples for years to come. I feel like even if you don't have the online interview, if you have the in-person interview once the world is back to normal, hi future people, this is a good way to practice for the interview. Split it up into sections based on what the program stands for and what your SOP says and what's going on in the world in that moment, so that you're fully and completely prepared. So yes, if you guys like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any more video recommendations, please comment them below. I am happy to answer any other questions related to the JET program. I am still in America, but this process was so hard. The application process, yeah. If you have any questions, let me know. I can make a video about it. Yeah, so let me go because I'm hungry. Bye. Like, I'm not even gonna lie, y'all. It took me like 2 times to record this because we have construction going on downstairs, and like they are so loud. I don't know if you could hear them in the last portion of this video, but I had to wait for them to be done and able to like continue. Like, took a nap and everything just for them to finish. I can't wait for them to be done because I'm over it. All right, guys, practice your interview questions. Good luck. You got this.